Hey everybody, this is Devin Olson from Developer to Developer, and today we're going to be talking about characters. More specifically, how to rig a character to a skeletal system or a game engine of choice. To begin, I have a character in my scene here. This character is made up of a few different pieces. We have a body, a vest, and a head. Typically, when you begin to work on your character rigging or skinning, you want to work with your character as one object. For every object that you want to skin to a skeletal system, you'll have to have a skin modifier. And if you have multiple objects with skin modifiers, that becomes very taxing on your game performance. Depending on the amount of players that you allow, even just a handful of players, depending on how many objects you have loose that are as one object during the skinning process, can add up very fast. So we typically want to go ahead and attach all of our objects as one. So I'll start with the body here. And we'll scroll down to the attach tool, and we'll attach the vest to the body. You can press Alt-X to turn your original and attached objects on and off as far as transparency is concerned. That way you can kind of get a contrast to what existing objects are still out there that need to be attached, if ever need be. So we can see that the head right now needs to be attached, so we can attach the head and it becomes transparent. So Alt-X again, make it solid. Okay, so we can go ahead and turn the attach tool off. Make sure you do turn it off because it has a tendency to stay on, and if there's other things in the scene that you're working with that weren't necessarily supposed to be attached here, and you go to select it, you'll attach it. So let's go ahead and start identifying some of the characteristics of this mesh here. You can see that the bounding box around a character is not adhering to world space. It's doing its best to fit around the character like it should, but it has a weird orientation. We'll need to fix that before we start our skinning process. Otherwise, it's just going to be translated wrong, and it's best just to clean it up now. The other characteristic is that we have an edible mesh here instead of an edible poly. We'll come back to that in a second, but to fix the bounding box itself, let's go over to the Utility tab. And you'll see we have what's called a Reset X form. Now, if you don't see this, it might be under your More here, somewhere listed in here, and if it is, just go ahead and select one and choose OK. And what should happen is that you'll get an additional rollout here, where you want to add a reset selected. Okay, you'll see that bounding box has reset itself to world space, and it's doing its best to bound around the character mesh. Flipping back over to the modifier tab, you'll see it's added an X form modifier that basically took our original bounding box and gave it some sort of coordinates to the resetter to reset the bounding box off of this. So let's go ahead and just collapse this down into our edible mesh now by right-clicking it and saying collapse to. Great. So again, I said this is an edible mesh, and we would come back to that. The reason I wanted to mention that is because if you hit F4 on your keyboard, typically what happens is that when you bring in edible meshes into a scene, you get the full view of how the mesh is going to be rendered in a game engine, meaning that you have the subdivisions in the polygons themselves, the faces, visible. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just becomes very difficult when you're trying to work with the verts that are utmost important at holding the shape of the character up throughout the rigging process. They just get in the way, all these additional subdivisions. So to get these subdivisions out of the way, you're going to need to switch from edible mesh to edible poly. So we'll go ahead and right-click on the character and go to convert to edible poly, and you'll see those subdivisions are still there. Going to the edge tool or edge selection, and then under the modeling flyout geometry, you can hit the quadrify all, and you'll see that it's removed those additional subdivisions, so that we can just see the important vertices that are holding up the shape of the character before we start rigging anything. Alright, so now let's move on to the actual skeletal system itself. If you go over to the Create tab, one of the very last tabs we have right here is called System. Under System, you have the ability to add what's called a biped. A biped is a pre-designed, pre-configured humanoid, to start with typically, skeletal system. Now, a lot of people typically like to make their own skeletal systems or IK systems using the bones here, but that can take a bit of time to talk about the IK system and how to link your IKs together. So I typically like to work with biped for now, and seems to be a little bit of there also seems to be sort of a cult following between which one you want to use. I typically start with Biped, and if I need additional bones with custom IK, I can attach those to Biped. So I really don't see any reason to have a big fuss over what system you use, unless the engine that you're bringing into it dictates one system or another, right? So for Unity 3D, bipeds are perfectly fine. So if we choose biped, you'll see we open up a series of options down below that give us things like neck links, and spine links, and leg links, and these are all attributed to a number. So if you have 2 spine links, you'll have 2 spine bones to work with, and if you set it to 3, you'll have 3, and so on. There's additional things like ponytails, the amount of finger links that you want, toes, toe links. It gets pretty detailed. You can even get down into the twist links between each connecting bone, and of course extras. So assuming that you've pre-configured all of these numbers correctly and how you want, you can go ahead and go into your scene, and typically starting at the middle of your grid point, you want to click and then drag. Okay. And that will create a biped system for us. If you come into the height value here, because you'll notice that when I clicked and dragged, I was only left with a limited amount of room before I reached the bottom of my window to actually continue scaling up during the create process. But you can continue to scale this up through the height value here until you get something you like. All right, so the goal of a biped system is to get it to fit within your mesh as close as possible, right? Just like any sort of skeletal system, you don't want to have your arms, starting way down here while the mesh is dictated out here and then beginning your rig process. Because what that means is that when that biped skeletal arm moves up, the mesh is going to move or counter move the exact distance and overshoot. So you'll start to get arms folding into the head. So the idea is to get the skeletal system to line up to the mesh as close as possible. All right, so let's start positioning our skeletal system around our mesh. To do this, we'll go ahead and, for now, we're going to hide our mesh. And choosing any one of the bones, let's go over to our Motion tab. And under the Motion tab, you have a whole bunch of controls for your biped system. One of those controls is called Figure Mode. Okay. Figure Mode leaves you in a mode where you can sort of not only rotate things that you could outside of figure mode, but you can scale things now in any direction, so that if you were to unhide, we could go ahead and start adhering our skeletal system to our mesh. You can see that figure mode sometimes moves your biped around a little, but that's not a problem. Let's go ahead and hit H on our keyboard, choose biped 1, press F, and then Z. Scroll out a little bit, change to move. I'll move this guy up. Go ahead and hit P for perspective and Z for zoom. And we'll go ahead and just start to choose some of our different bones. Go ahead and click the mesh and choose Alt X so it's transparent. You can see what's underneath the mesh. You want to choose it. It might take a couple clicks to hit a bone, but you'll eventually get it. Go ahead and rotate these out. And the goal is, again, to try to get sort of the last joint endpoints on your extremities, such as your legs, the feet on your legs, and the hands on your arms to match up on the mesh, just as we did with the head when we worked with the height value. You can do multi-selected bones. So if we come in here and just select the 2 upper arm bones and have our orientation set to local, we can go ahead and rotate these at the same time. Go to T for top view. You can see his elbows out here on the mesh. So let's try to get his elbows to match up. We'll select both forearms, again under local. Rotate those out. Okay, so you can see that the palms aren't matching where the mesh is, and because we're under figure mode, again, we can scale. So looks like we need to get our elbow out further first. Selecting the upper arm bones and changing to scale, right click, scale. You can scale these out. Right. Now we're getting a much cleaner hit on the palms of the mesh and the bones. Obviously we can scale out the forearms too. Great. It kind of looks like the elbows are a little higher than the mesh itself, and that originates from the clavicle. So if we come in here and select two clavicles, again, you can press H on your keyboard to get a select list if you need. And we'll go to L clavicle. It's okay. And we're going to move these down. The clavicles are starting bones. There's a few bones that you can move around, such as the clavicles, the neck, I believe the first spine. So we'll move these down until our elbows are at a good spot. Let's also rotate them a bit. The move might be a bit extreme. You gotta remember that he's carrying a heavy vest, so his shoulders might be slouched. Just on the weight on the clavicles itself. So a little bit of a rotate in those, and maybe a rotate on the upper arms. I'm holding Alt to deselect the mesh, if you were wondering. Alright. Some of the rotations are getting jumpy, and that's because I have my angle snap tool on. So if I need a finer one, finer rotation, most likely that'll be off for you when you start, but I tend to switch that back and forth because I like to rotate under grid a lot of times. But with it off, you get a finer rotate. Okay. Trying to get the palms to line up better now. Right, that's pretty good. Try to get the palms to line up. Once we get the palms in a good position, we're more focused on the orientation of the palms now to get the bone links for the fingers. A good trick for working with the finger links is if you want to just rotate one as a parent of the rest, you can just click that single one, but it gets kind of tedious to then select the next one and rotate it slightly, and the next one and rotate it slightly over all the fingers for both hands. So a quick trick would be to chain select, which is just to quickly double select that first one, and you see it created a chain select. So if I rotate it, they all arc at the same time. It's a little bit quicker. I'm not doing a really good job here lining these up. I'm just kind of giving you some techniques to lining your own up. And you'll notice that I'm working under a single hand instance now. I don't have both fingers chain selected while I'm doing this, and I'll show you in a second why. I think you can move fingers too. If I wanted to, I could move those around, get a good position. Looks like it's got a good arc already. I just need to kind of get it lined up better. You'll notice that my transform is set to view right now, but a good one is called screen. So no matter where I'm turning in perspective view, I have a solid XY axis. That one's a nice one. So if I know that I just need to move it this way, but none of my left, right, or front views kind of give me this view, I can set myself to screen here. and do it myself. Just don't forget to turn it back off when you're done. The fingers and the hands are definitely the hardest part of character rigging by far. But with a little bit of practice, it's not that bad. Careful when you have chain selected too, that if you rotate in left and right axis, start to get some bends in those, and those are really hard to undo. So you typically want to do chain selection in closing your fist fashion, or opening your fingers. We probably want to scale all of these bones here. So this is kind of where it gets tedious, right? We've got to select all these guys, and deselect the mesh. We'll scale these all by local, so that the fingertips come in. Pinky looks pretty good. So we also probably want to scale these all up. Let's just select all of these bones. Deselect the palm, just the fingers. Under a scale of local, go ahead and choose Z, and we'll make them a little bit thicker, and Y. So that it really tries to touch the mesh, right? Because the skinnier they are, when it comes time to start adding our modifier for weighting the vertices to these bones, the envelope that reaches out to kind of predict the weight between 3 different bones on one vert is going to be smaller. So if we get the bones to try to touch the mesh just a little bit, it's pretty good. Do the same for the palm. Right? You want to be careful though how you do it. Sometimes you just can't because it's going to affect the children, and you'll just have to fix that later. These guys, I think you can. Yeah, you can certainly increase the thickness of these. Right. Again, be careful what axis you choose because you don't want to affect the children. See how we just messed it up? The palm fingers down there. Alright. So that was just one hand, one arm. That was a bit of time to spend. Now if we were to come over here and start working on this one, there'll be some inconsistencies and whatnot. A good method to use is underneath the Motion tab, you have what's called a CopyPaste, right? CopyPaste is for copying poses. So if we were to do a chain selection on this upper arm bone down through all the fingers, so double click real quick, we can come over into the copy rollout and choose copy posture, and you'll see it copied all the bones that are red right here in this little picture, and we have the opportunity to name this. So right hand pose, right, and then we can go ahead and paste that to the opposite side by choosing the paste posture opposite. And if we have symmetry in our mesh, which we hopefully should have, if you don't, by the way, you can select half your mesh if it's subdivided correctly and add the symmetry modifier, change the axis up, typically under flip, and you could be working on just one side of your mesh and have perfect symmetry as a result on the other side. That's another tutorial though. But with the posture, under the rollout, motion rollout, you can copy all kinds of different poses. Now for our game, we have, I would say, 20 or 30 different poses we work with when we're setting up our character animations, setting up different rigs. So they come really in handy. There's different tools, so if you have a collection, so each time you copy a posture out, it's going to add it to the rollout here, right? And this is called basically, your collection. So you can save a collection out. You can create a new collection other than the one that you've been working with default. You can load a collection, or you can save a collection out. You can delete collections. delete all the collections. I mean, there's a whole host of different ways you can save and repaste and use these different postures. Real handy tool. Okay, so jumping ahead a bit here, we have our finished biped system scaled up a bit. I went ahead and imported my skeletal system that I share across all the characters of my existing game to proceed with this tutorial. So you'll see that the work that we did in the clavicles has changed a bit, but the goal was the same, is to line up the endpoints of your extremities, such as the feet and the hands, and obviously try to scale it up to match the width of the mesh in the character as close as possible. And the reason that I went ahead and brought in my shared skeletal system is because, again, this skeletal system is shared across all the characters in our game. And so when we have one skeletal system, you really don't have the ability under figure mode to scale different bones according to this character mesh, but more or less you're trying to just utilize the system to the existing mesh. Obviously, you're allowed to come into the mesh itself after trying to get as close as possible, such as in this situation where I have a pre-existing skeletal system, and change some things around, like you could move the mesh up and down a little bit here or there to get it to fit around the skeletal system as you like. So just keep in mind there's two directions. There's obviously under figure mode scaling the skeletal system around the mesh, but if you have an existing skeletal system, you can go the other way, which is kind of manipulate the mesh around the skeletal system. So the next step is that we want to go ahead and select our mesh, and we're going to add what's called a skin modifier. Great. The skin modifier is where you're going to be adding the bones of our skeletal system that will basically begin to weight the different vertices on our mesh based on 3 close bones within proximity. So each bone with the skin modifier is given basically an envelope. It's basically a capsule around the bone itself to have a fall off distance and threshold distance that searches for verts, our little connecting points in our subdivisions on our mesh, and give it a weight between 0 and 100 to control how much that bone moves that vertice around when we move the bone around. So any vert can have up to 3 bones manipulating it weight-wise, but no more than 3. You can have less, but again, no more than 3. So let's go ahead and just, on the skin modifier, click the Add button. Actually, I'm sorry. The skeletal systems, the biped systems themselves, have what's called wrist twists. It's an extra helper bone, so if I hide this mesh here, you can see we have this grayed out block, right? And that's an extra bone that has a slightly less IK influence on its rotation. So if we were to rotate wrist, you can see that it's being rotated as well, whereas the forearm bone isn't, right? So we don't want the forearm bone to twist. We want it to stay solid, and we do want the palm to twist. And if we didn't have a helper bone in here for the wrist twist, you would get some really harsh vert weights between the subtle stopping point of what shouldn't move and what should move. And it gets really difficult when you go to, say, grasp a weapon out in front of you or some sort of item out in front of you, and you're twisting the wrist in a way that makes the vertices collapse on themselves, and it becomes very skinny. Unfortunately, though, most biped systems come with the wrist twists frozen, or basically not able to add to our skin modifier. So you can just go ahead and right click and say unfreeze all. And if you still don't see them after unfreezing, you can go ahead and say unhide all, and they should show up. So let's go back to our modifier, and we're going to click add, and you should see all the bones here now. And see there's the forearm twist for right. So with them all selected, click add, and they should show up in this list here. Great. The modifier isn't actually active yet, so if we click it one more time or click edit envelopes, same thing. You can start to see that any bone that we have selected in this list right here is going to be highlighted out here. And you can also see these fine lines that represent the bones, and with them clicked, it updates our list out here. Okay. You can see a visual representation of that capsule I was talking about, where the threshold is the inner capsule and the fall-off distance is the outer capsule. So this particular bone has a threshold that is basically well within the region that we would like it to be inside the mesh, but the fall-off distance is well exceeding out to the other leg and is most likely influencing the other leg bones. So if we were to lift this leg up, you would get some of the verts on the other leg being pulled out as well, and that would look strange. So our goal is to go through each one of these bones and play with the envelopes themselves and lower them down into a much more suitable fall-off size, and then maybe sometimes increase the threshold radius. Okay. The capsules are made up with little points that you can select. I believe you can grab it anywhere, right? And do your change. Just remember that sometimes there's points that you're after, and then there's different parts to keep in mind on each capsule envelope. So we have the threshold radius on the outside, so you can grab that and scale it up from anywhere on the bottom part as well as the top part, right? And that goes for the threshold as well. The threshold, if you scale it beyond the fall-off will basically take its original point before you started scaling out and double itself out, and then you can keep pushing it out. So we'll undo that and keep there. And then you can also manipulate. If you click these little points at the top and bottom of those faded lines that brought us to this envelope, you can move those around, and that's basically like you're repositioning the envelope in a much finer detail. So again, you'll notice like up here our clavicle work that we had done. If we select the line for the upper arm, it's not in the center of the mesh we would like it to be. Well, this is the opportunity to fix that. So here, like in F, we can move the starting point of this fall off and threshold capsule down where we want it to. And so then the bones just become a visual representation at that point, whereas the weighting is exactly where we would like it to be. Unfortunately, you can't multi-edit these, so you can't come in here and change both of these around like you could when you were under figure mode and rotating those around. So you're going to have to do one at a time and then come over here and make sure you do the same thing. So yeah, there's a lot of positioning and changing the radiuses of our fall off and threshold throughout this process. But the process really starts with us making a change in our pose of our character now to see how the skin is deforming or is not deforming correctly. So I typically like to start with the spines. Because the spines are the largest bones, really, and they influence almost all of the extremities. So if we can get those thresholds down, as well as the fall-off distances well within the radius of the character, we're not going to have to fight it all the way along the way of trying to get our arms worked out, and our head, and all that sort of stuff. So coming into the upper portion, you can see we have the top portion is kind of like a triangle shape of your torso. So we want to make that fall off distance there as well. And then the threshold radius, sort of mimic that. I like to keep my threshold just within the mesh, and then the fall off just outside of it. So it creates this nice blue fall off. The colors represent the actual weight value. So red is a full weight, yellow is like a 50% weight, and blue is reaching no weight. So we'll come down to the next spine, and you can see those fall off distances are really far out there. That would really affect our arms underneath. If we had started with the arms, we would be kind of fighting that the whole way, wondering why isn't it deforming the way we want. Okay. This is kind of another triangle too, where the waist gets a little bit smaller. So we'll increase the threshold the top a little bit. All right. Let's move over to the head. So hitting L and Z, select the head bone here. So the head, they try to do their best at trying to find a normalized spot for these envelopes across all character instances that you could be building. So this is the best spot, I guess, which is just sort of a horizontal looking forward envelope. But I mean, almost in all of my characters that are humanoid, I've had to redefine the shape by selecting one of the points and moving it up so that the end of the capsule represents the top of the cranium, and the other end of the capsule represents the chin. All right, getting a little difficult to see here. This. That way we kind of keep the fall off away from the neck bone and clavicles on down to the spine, and it's really just kind of focusing on the head, right? You can only lift your head up at a degree so far. I mean, you can't touch the top of your head to your back. That's impossible. And this gives you more of a fall off distance to make his chin touch his chest, right? So let's go ahead and take the chin down a little bit. I want to move it like so. Bring the fall off distance in. You can see the color starting around his neck starting to turn from blue and yellow, meaning that we're going to have a nice blend between the neck bone and the head bone. And then we want to make the top portion for the cranium larger in both threshold and fall off. Got a good left view there, so we couldn't select the threshold. We'll bring that in. Hit L view again. You don't really need to bring this in to match the cranium at this point, but I just like to. It's kind of a pet peeve. All right. So the next step we want to do is probably work on the legs. You'll notice I'm trying to click something right here, but we're still under sort of a select mode, and this is kind of a bug of Mac. So if you come in and trying to select a bone, and it clearly says that you should be able to select it, but it's just not letting go of that skin modifier, just press Control A and click somewhere in the scene, and try it again. Kind of kicks it into gear. Let's go ahead and move this leg up, and right off the bat we can see that we've got some problems with his vest right here, and the way that his thigh is interacting with the blended value weights and verts according to his shin bone here. So from here on out, it's a matter of moving a bone around and then seeing how the envelopes involved in that move interact with each other, and the mesh is deformed. So let's start with these bags, right? So this is going to be the quickest cleanup, and it's going to help us out visually. Turning in the skin modifier, you have an option at the top of the rollout called vertices. With that checked, you can go ahead and check the select element, and what that will allow us to do is we can start selecting the entire set of vertices for this bag, right? And all of these little bags in the front here. This. Right. Okay, and then the actual vest that's close to his body, we're not going to select. We just want to select these bigger, bulky pieces that really don't need to be deformed in the way that something close to the body or skin or clothing would. So with those selected, we're going to scroll down in the skin modifier to what's called the weight table. And I've talked about this in my previous tutorial about rigging weapons, but the weight table gives you a representation of all the verts in the scene and or you have selected. So right now we have a view of all verts. If we change this to selected vertices only, and then we say select all, okay, you'll see that we have these columns and rows of the vertices now. The actual columns represents the bones that are out there that we're working with, whereas the rows are the vertices themselves. And the numbers in the corresponding points is the weight value. Right? So some of them have 1, some of them have 0.644, and so on. What we want to do is we want to have these big bulky pieces, these bags, that really don't need to deform, but do need to still follow a particular bone. We're going to want to select that bone that we want them to follow. So in this case, it's going to be the first spine bone. And what happened is in our weight table here, you can see spine 1 became selected as the column. So we'll just go to select all again. This is going to select all the vertices. Again, we're filtering for only selected vertices. Holding Control and right-clicking on any one of these rows in this column will set the selected vertices to a weight of 100. You can see the color change to red out here on them. Great. Let's go ahead and close the weight table. Click somewhere in the scene to unselect those vertices, and if you want, you can come back up here and turn vert mode off, so you're not going to need it. Unless you have other pieces that you want to weight to another bone. And so if we turn off the modifier, select our spine bone again, we can see how this is going to kind of stick to our character's first spine. You're going to create some clipping between those big items and maybe the thigh, but you're certainly not going to get these ammo boxes or these bags to stretch wildly based on leg movements or upper spine movements, as they should be. I mean, they should be solid pieces that have items in them that are weighting them down, and they shouldn't deform the way that the skin does, right? Okay, so the next thing is that we have some sort of just basic weighting problems right here. So let's go ahead and select our mesh again, click the skin modifier. And since we've made that movement to the biped, you'll notice that these lines right here don't really adhere to our movement. And if you make a lot of movements and then come in and try to edit the mesh, those lines are just all over the place, and it might get really hard to select the right one. This is just, I believe, another bug in Mac. So if you just take your timeline and scrub it once, they go back into place. So we'll select our thigh bone here. Okay, so there's a couple things that are causing this big dip right here, and that's just the fall-off values and threshold values when we reach the knee on both the thigh and your calf here. And it also has to do with where those endpoints in these capsules are meeting. So if we hit L and move these in, see we're playing with, you can really see how it starts to fold. These changes sort of manipulate stuff. So I typically, on the legs themselves, like to reposition the ends of the capsules first. And the goal is to try to, again, it's not just like going to be some weird thing out here, that looks pretty good, I guess. But it's always, it typically is that you just need to move it down, and it needs to be position centered better within the mesh at this particular view. So on the left view, it's good to have it positioned in the center here and pulled down from the top of the knee a little bit, so it's not pushing, that threshold's not pushing up into the thigh. And it creates a nice fold. We could play with the fall-off values if you want, and what that's going to do is it's going to space out the distance of the verts right here. See that? But I think that was pretty good, actually. It wasn't horrible. Not going to worry too much about this right now because it's probably related to the pelvis bone. But I am going to take a look at what's going on right here in the way that the fold between the pelvis and the thigh is happening. I think that might just be fixed by doing a simple reposition, maybe increasing the threshold a little bit. Okay, well, let's go into the pelvis first, because I think this is just like the spine bones, where this might just be causing some weird troubles for us that we can resolve or work through quicker by fixing it first. So hit L for left. All right, increase the thresholds. Pretty good. Okay. And I think if we move this down now, let's kind of move it around a little. It's getting pretty good. It also might be that we just need to move our pelvis in too. All right, well, that's going to be pretty good. Let's move on to the calf here. Hitting L. Probably want to move the lower portion more centered. Like so. Decrease the fall off distance so that it's not running into the foot. Increase the threshold a little bit so it creates a nicer seam. All right. Front view could use some work too. I should also mention that there's a mirror mode to this that you could basically set up a invisible axis line so that any sort of envelope changes or vert changes as far as weighting is concerned that you do to one side is done to the other. However, I find a lot of problems with this mirror mode tool as far as pasting verts, and it leaves a lot of questions as far as to why sometimes the verts aren't pasted more times than it doesn't. And my motto is that if I spend more time working with an additional tool and it results in me having to spend more time with that tool than just doing it another way, then that tool is probably not going to be the best for me. So what I like to do is when I need to copy a particular envelope value, you can simply right click it and say copy envelope, and then go to the other side and paste envelope. I just pasted the threshold and fall off values. I didn't actually paste the positions. So you will have to reposition those yourselves. So again, there's a trade-off to using the mirror mode and or copying them. So if you move the other leg now up, in fact, if we want, here, let's go ahead and just make a pose copy. Go ahead and copy posture from right and paste it to left. We can go ahead and start to fix up this leg. Modifier. Let's go ahead and scrub our timeline. By hitting front view, we're going to reposition these down. And we're going to switch to right view. Z to zoom. Center these out. You can see the other one and the other leg right here, so try to get that to line up a little bit better. Perfect. Work on the thigh now. So that's the right thigh. We're working on the left thigh. We want to move first. Down here. And then once the thigh is moved, we want to copy envelope values, just like we did with the calf. Great. All right, let's check out the feet. So we got some influence in the calves by the feet. We'll need to fix. Rotate those back. Now again, the feet, like the head, they tried to normalize the position as best possible. Just vertical. So you'll need to move these typically to sort of conform to the shape of the foot. And they're usually a lot smaller than what they normalize at. So the toe is skinnier than the ankle. Being sure not to run into the actual toe bone. Change the fall-offs. Okay, let's change the shape of the other foot. That here. That here. Oops. Missed it. There. Okay, so let's copy values. Paste the values. Cool. And then let's look at these toes. I think probably the threshold's good, just need to change the fall-off values. Those are very minor bends, typically in game animations. I mean, unless you're doing a specific animation for a ballerina, you probably don't need to spend very much time on the toes. All right, so let's recheck these feet now. So it looks like they could probably maybe have a little bit more influence. But we got our shape, so it's just a matter of just playing with the fall-off value at this point. Copy this. Yeah, it's pretty good. So the calf isn't influencing the shape of the shoe, right? Because those tend to be stiff. But the feet are more or less influencing the cloth. Cool. Okay, let's get back to a T-pose position. I actually have a posture for that. Okay, so next, we probably want to work on the upper arms. So selecting both upper arms and moving these up. And with them moved into the up position, just go ahead and right click and say hide. We get a good view of how being influenced right here. This is kind of weird stretching right here, so we'll probably need to work on some of the clavicles, I would assume. Scrub our timeline. That fall off on that clavicle is sort of large. Just copy the values and paste the values. Again, I know there's mirror mode. I've just been burned by it so many times. Maybe there's somebody out there who wants to leave a comment, pointing me to some better resources as far as why it just doesn't work sometimes. The pasting the verts left and right, watching your influences and your changes, it just doesn't work. Even with perfect symmetry, it comes out not the way that you want, and that's a lot of time spent working on trying to get something to work, to have it not work. So going to F view, or front view, let's change the position of these upper arms to be within the mesh. Maybe somebody out there does know a way to copy and paste envelope positions. That would be really helpful too. If you could leave a comment for me and the viewers. I just have only been able to copy the values for fall off and threshold. Okay, so let's increase the threshold on this guy. Maybe it's a decrease in the fall off. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Working on the forearms now. Notice that there's 4 selections that I just made. One for the forearm bone and one for the wrist twist on each side. Let's bring down the fall distance on these. Just outside the mesh. So a good one too is under local. So under local, select the end here and bring it up off the wrist slightly. Good. Bring it down. Make sure you change back to world though when you're changing fall-offs and your thresholds. Okay, let's check our elbows out. I'm sorry, let's take a look at what's going on here. Yeah, I think we just needed a larger fall-off distance underneath his arms. I wanted a nice, good division. You don't want one start of a polygon start and then the other side of it to start over here, and then a bunch of subdivisions just kind of packed up in one side. You want to kind of smooth subdivisions, good topology going across your bends. You want to use those subdivisions for your bends, basically. Okay, so let's go back to his elbows. So under local, rotate the elbows now. And let's hide his forearms. And we will hide the wrist twists. Just so we can see how the elbows look. And yep, they need a little bit of work. Scrub timeline. And it looks like just some shape work. It probably would have been best to bend them before we tried playing with the shapes before, but well, it's looking a lot better. See how I'm creating a fold so that the sort of the bicep and the forearm, they sort of clip together when he's bending his elbow. You don't want this big, huge rubber bandy bend right there. You want them to clip. You want them to fold right there. Whereas out here, you do want that sort of nice bend in the subdivisions. Okay, so there was a little bit of repositioning there. So let's also do that to our wrist twist. Switch to screen. A little simple on ourselves. Again, I'm not anything but just trying to get it into the center of the mesh right now. So let's copy these. Copy envelope. Paste envelope. Oop, wrong one. Copy this guy. And the wrist twist as well. I don't think we changed anything other than position on wrist twist, so just start repositioning this side now. Again, I really wish there was a way to just copy positions, but just guess it doesn't work like that. It's not too bad. All right. Okay, let's go back to a T-pose again. Let's take a look at his spine time. So the subdivision here is leaving a couple of these out. See if we can't resolve that. I think that's going to be a pelvis change once more. Probably just fall off. Right. Now let's take a look at the head here. Yeah, let's throw this back into a T-pose position. Paste opposite. All right, so looking at the head, if we were to move it around, you can see we did our best to try to get the verts weighted to it by defining that shape we did, but we couldn't shape it any much bigger because it started running into the neck. And if you look at the neck, it's not too bad. It's just his jawline is adhering to the neck slightly more than we like. So this is a good opportunity to talk about the painting tool of the skin modifier. So going back to skin modifier and choosing head, scroll down a bit, we have the paint weight tool. Now typically default this is checked, and you're going to want to uncheck this if you're going to do some hand painting here. So let's turn the painting tool on, and we get a nice brush representation that's going to basically raycast and align itself to the surface of the mesh that we're painting. So as you move it around, you can see it kind of changing all different angles according to the normals of the faces, which is nice. The three dots next to the paint weights opens up a rollout or window that gives you all the different options as far as setting the brush size. So 5 would be much smaller, 1 even smaller. It has a max strength of 1, so if I hit one of these, it should set that vert to 1. In this instance, we do want these to set to 1, so a nice 1 value or maximum is good here, but we're going to set this probably to like a 5. Okay. And we're going to just start painting. You see how his cheek turned a little bit. You see how it's kind of yellow right here. As we go over it by clicking and painting, it turns red. Do that to his beard. His ears. Behind his ears. Don't forget behind the ears. Right. Let's see what kind of influence we've done there. So let's just rotate it up first. And yeah, we still have a bit more painting to do. Maybe we can turn the value up more. Don't worry about the back of the head right now. We'll fix that when we move his head forward. Let's come back in here, change this back down to maybe 0.1. And holding Alt this time, you can unpaint things. We kind of want that subdivision underneath his chin to be nice and smooth when he lifts it up. That way we don't cause a harsh fold when he puts it back down. Okay, let's go the other direction now. Take a look at how his chin's deforming. It's really nice. Make him look down. Let's see, we need to paint some of these. Turn paint mode off to switch bones. Scrub the timeline. Okay, so if you're missing any of the verts in the ears, you can do that now. They seem to be set. Just a neckline change now, so start moving these in. And I'm holding Alt to unpaint. And again, you're painting against 3 different bones, the 3 different closest bones, or 2 in this instance, that a vertex can be weighted against. So when you add or remove a value, just be aware that it's sometimes adding or removing down to just 2 bones from 3, or if you're just working in 2, you'll continue to work between 2 bones. Okay. Back up. It's pretty good. You can always keep refining and tuning and changing how things look. Just maybe turn it to the left and right, but usually when you get front and back done, left and right is not that bad. What you do want to test is looking left and right and seeing how that Kind of mixes between all 4 axes. Not too bad. Certainly a lot better than what it was. Okay, so really the only last part to go over is the fingers themselves, and they, again, just like setting them up, are the most tedious part as far as getting them weighted, because look how close these things are. I mean, these verts practically touch each other in some instances, so those envelopes obviously are going to need a lot of work, and sometimes it requires some hand painting. You could spend a long time on these bones, but just remember, start with envelopes. Start with your fall-offs, your thresholds, and your positions first before you start getting into any sort of painting situation. It's just going to save you time. You're going to be fighting between the weights of 3 bones that aren't even in the correct position, only to realize I should have just positioned them first. It's one joint, just working our way next joint. This is why having a screen mode is really helpful at this point in the envelope editing. Just much better to get a left-right view of the finger, because the fingers just kind of spiral from the palm itself out, down, and they have some curl to them. Yeah, it's just, you're not going to be able to get the positions the way that you want in a front left scenario, especially on the middle fingers and ring finger. Right, so that's one finger, and then we just continuously play with the fall-off values. I want to start with the larger object too that's going to be influencing these fingers. That would be the palm. Let's bring that fall-off value down. Increase the threshold. Change the shape, but do so under local. Bring that up off the finger. And change the back shape a little. Change that to world. You see how the wrist, that really kind of cleaned up the wrist too. Alright, so you might be tempted to start moving some of these fingers around before you finish up the envelopes of the rest of the fingers. But I wouldn't. I would just keep going. Just want to keep playing with these. Okay, jumping forward past all the fingers and hand work, assuming that you got all the envelopes worked out and you've gone ahead and painted any of the verts that were still being influenced by another finger that shouldn't, we're at a good spot to kind of move forward and talk about some other stuff. So if you go back to the motion tab and have a bone selected, if we're still under figure mode, you have a lack of options that you've probably seen before. So if we turn figure mode off, there's a bunch of different things in here that we could probably go over. Motion capture is a way to import some motion cap files or mocap files, such as BVH files. So if you work with a studio that provides you some custom motion capture that you would like to run on this biped system, you'll basically want to go under here while you're out of figure mode. And the first one is load motion cap file. And you'll basically be loading up a BIP, a BVH, or CSM. Typically come in BVH format. Layers is sort of another helpful animation tool for setting up independent animations on different layers. So this really isn't part of the scanning process, but it's good to learn these. Keyframing tools, again, part of the animation. Key info. This is a good area if you've seen my tutorial on rigging and animating 3D weapons, where I cover on how you can basically take your hands or other parts of the biped system and adhere them to objects in 3D space and still have those hands utilize the biped's IK. So if there's a weapon or an item out there, you can basically IK link your different body parts or biped parts to that object or that item. And if you move that item around, it moves the arms around. Much quicker for animating than moving your hands around. So I suggest you check out rigging and animating 3D weapons if you're interested in that sort of information on how to link IK hands to objects. There's different things like the bin links that are useful for the amount of bend that you have between each joint. And obviously the copy and paste is still available outside of figure mode. I suggest you read up on some of these in the help documentation. If you're outside of figure mode, another really good one too is loading up and saving BIP files. So if I have an animation, I can save out a BIP representation. You can save the full timeline, and it will save out each keyframe. And then you can load it back up on other characters or this character. So that's really nice. Also, if you get into a point where you've rigged your character, you're playing around in your game, and you're looking at this character realizing, wow, I probably should have done some sort of mesh optimization, or maybe you're moving your game over to a mobile version, right, where you just want to reduce some of these polys. But you've already rigged this character. It's pretty easy to go ahead and still optimize this. So you just go back to your modifier tab, go to the first modifier, which is your edit to poly. Come in here and select some of these subdivisions if you want, double click them, hold control and backspace. That will clear them out while also retaining the UVs. That's why I hold control. Do it that way. You could do some mesh optimization still to this. Maybe this extra fold in here is just not necessary. And then you can come back, make sure you don't have anything selected still, and then make sure that you turn any one of these select modes off before going back up to your skin modifier. And believe it or not, you should be able to still have a good modification. It should be able to pick up the values. It's much easier to take away than it is to add, if that makes any sense. So before we close out, another good helpful thing to do is, like I said, under the motion tab, while having the biped selected, you can load up and make sure you're out of figure mode. Different BIPs out there that are animations. Some of them are dedicated to rotating all the joints of the character so that you can kind of test everything in an animation timeline. So you can scrub your timeline out to frame 25 where he's bending forward or doing a backflip or whatever it is, and just kind of play with the weights better instead of just doing a static T-pose. So if we have this thing right here, I don't know what this animation is, but get some sort of dance. Or sports, I think he might be shooting a basketball or something. But running it over an actual animation over your skeletal system really gives you a good opportunity before you actually take it into game to see how things are going to work. Like I can see right here, maybe I need to work on that wrist a little bit better. And some of the spines, how they're rotating left and right, can work out. But overall, it's coming together. And I know what I need to do to fix this. And when you're done and you want to take it to the game engine, just make sure you have everything selected and come down to your timeline. Select just the keyframes, hit delete, right? Right here is your timeline configuration. If you don't want to have a massive timeline, you can just set that back to 1. And you probably wanted to save out a T-pose if you hadn't already, like I have here, at some point, so that when it comes time to actually save it out like you're doing now, you can just paste your T-pose and save your file. Looks like our position is not at the center. Again, this is just a pet peeve. So if you want to move your biped system around now that it's been skinned, you want to go to the biped 01 or 001 root bone. That's the absolute root bone, and just kind of move that around. I hope this tutorial has been helpful as far as showing all the different approaches to working with the skin modifier and the biped system, working under figure mode, not figure mode, selecting vertices under an element selection, using the weight table, and even how to paint some of these weights on these verts between the 3 bones. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to comment below. Thanks for watching.